Hello and welcome to Views on News. I'm your host Rafa Iqbal, and in today's show we'll be talking about Donald Trump as he has won the US elections. And of course we know Donald Trump is currently preparing to select his top team ahead of his return to the White House, which is a historic return in itself after Kamala Harris, she vowed a peaceful transfer of power. Trump won 5 of the 7 battleground states that we were talking about earlier in the days, as well as these were the key battleground states that were going to decide who is going to be the next president of America. And we know Trump has secured 5 of these 7 key swing states. The Republicans have also retaken control of the US Senate, and they also lead the contest to control the House of Representatives, which of course is a testament to the strong position that the Republicans have at the moment in the political system of United States of America, and how they're in a strong position to introduce legislations and the reforms that Donald Trump has been talking about as well. We also, if we talk about the economic factor, the different indices in the US stock market, they witnessed a bullish trend. And especially with regards to Elon Musk, as he has been financing Donald Trump's campaign, and he has been a big sponsor. And of course, with regards to the Tesla share prices, they also saw a very bullish trend. Everyone is now looking towards the commitments and the promises made by Donald Trump during his electoral campaigns, and the policies that he has been talking about with regards to the domestic factors such as women's rights, immigration, economy, and foreign policy, as well as Donald Trump. He talked about the war in Russia and Ukraine, and he said, as Donald Trump, as his policy is very well known, he's anti-war. We'll be deliberating on all the different aspects regarding Donald Trump's historic win and return to the White House, and the implications and prospects that will unfold for the United States of America and the American people. In the studios, we've been joined by Dr. Bakir Malik, who is a foreign affairs expert. Thank you for your time and being part of the conversation. We've also been joined by Aisha Tanzim, Head of Voice of America's South and Central Asia Division. Thank you for your time and being part of the conversation as well, Aisha. Before we start off our conversation, we'll move towards Javad Tehami, our anchor person in the United States, as he's been updating us regarding all the political developments that have been unfolding in the United States since the past few weeks, and has also been updating us regarding the different quarters in America, what they think about, what they thought about the candidates, and what they think about Donald Trump's policies that he has been talking about. Let's move towards Javad and see what he has for us today.
Hello and welcome to this special segment of Views on News at PTV World. Right now, I am here in Washington, D.C., and I'm honored and really privileged to be joined by a wonderful guest. He is Mr. Jafar Hasnain, a senior presenter and anchor person at TRT World. Mr. Jafar, thank you very much for being with us on this special segment of Views on News at PTV World. We really appreciate you taking time exclusively for our show.
Thank you very much. It's an honor. Thanks a lot.
Mr. Jafar Hasnain is specifically here to cover this historic presidential election in the United States of America. Since the results are out, we know Republican candidate, former President Donald Trump, the 45th President of the United States of America, has reclaimed incredibly this time around to become the 47th President of the United States of America. So without any delay, let's try to delve deeper into various aspects about what were the expectations, how surprising is this particular result, and what are going to be the priorities of the new president of the US as far as the domestic front is concerned, as well as the global front is concerned. So Mr. Jafar Hasnain, specifically talking about what were the predictions and how this particular result is different from those predictions.
I think to say that this election has been very surprising would be an understatement. In the lead up to the elections, most of the polls, in fact, all of the polls were showing a neck-and-neck race between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. There was a razor-thin margin between the two candidates. But what we saw unfold on the night of the election here in the United States is not just mind-boggling. It goes to show that Donald Trump has once again proven that polls in this country cannot be trusted. Because, see, Michigan, for example, he won Michigan with not a razor-thin margin. There is a significant margin. Same goes for many other swing states. In fact, right now, as we are seeing the results, Donald Trump has won in all swing states. So this goes to show how decisive of a lead he had over Kamala Harris in the lead up to the elections on election night. But again, right now, I'm sure many questions are being raised as to why she was defeated. I mean, according to some media outlets in this country, media outlets which lean traditionally towards the left, they were confident, maybe not as confident as they were back in 2020, but they were still confident that Kamala Harris is going to secure a victory in this election. In fact, if you remember, 3 days or 4 days before election night, there was a poll, an A plus poll about Iowa, which Iowa is a Republican state. I mean, it's a red state. Traditionally, it votes red. But that poll gave Kamala Harris a lead. And that took everyone by surprise.
Yeah.
All media outlets here in the United States were talking about, oh my God, so Iowa is also swinging towards the Democrats now? And at the time, they were saying that, okay, it's the women, it's the abortion rights issue that is basically forcing Iowa to lean towards the Democrats. I think Kamala Harris had about 3 to 4 percentage points more than Donald Trump in that particular poll. But the results are out. Donald Trump has won Iowa with a huge margin over Kamala Harris. So
I'll come to Mr. Jefferson, a very detailed analysis regarding that. So I just want to know quickly as to what were those strengths or what were those promises or the things which former President Donald Trump took up during the election campaign that might have resonated very well with the general masses over here in the US, and what were those 2 or 3 major weaknesses that you can identify at the moment that actually were the stumbling blocks as far as the Democrat candidate is concerned.
Okay, let's talk about Donald Trump first. I think this is something that I've realized after covering the elections here in the United States. People like him because he talks like many of us. He's very original. He's not articulated as any other politician in this country.
He doesn't make things up.
Exactly. When he talks, he talks.
He's whatever
Oh,
he is.
he does make things up. I mean, he does talk many things which are not based on facts.
Okay.
But you know what? That's what
you're specifically talking about the style.
the style, yeah.
That comes naturally to him.
Exactly.
Okay, so,
That's very natural.
so he's
That's
not
very
faking the things up.
very relatable. You know, if, for example, in this country, one of my friends, he raised up, if you had to get coffee with either of the candidates, which one would you choose? I think most of them would go for Donald Trump because, you know, if for them he's fun, he's entertainment, and he's entertaining based on his background because he worked in television. He had this highest rated show in the United States called The
that
Apprentice.
actually gets the mass appeal? That resonates well?
It does. It does. Absolutely, it does. It does. And I think this was what was lacking in Kamala Harris. She was very political. She spoke like a politician as opposed to talking like a common person. And you know, this is what they say about Donald Trump. In fact, he says it about himself that he's man of the people. He is for the people. So I think that was a huge factor, and I think I disagreed with a lot of people in the lead up to the election about the issues people were voting on. I understand abortion is a key issue here in this country. I would say among the top 3, but I don't think it was the top issue when voters here were going to the polls. For them, it was the economy, because when people in this country, when they were going to the polls, what they had in their mind was whether or not I can afford a house, whether or not I can buy a car, whether or not I can pay my student debt. So these are the issues people were focusing on, because if you compare Donald Trump's presidency with Joe Biden's presidency, it's true that during his time, inflation was lower than what it was during Biden. Now,
so what I understand from your take is that Kamala Harris didn't have that concrete policy regarding these issues which actually matter to the Americans the most.
I mean, it's not about her policy. She served under the Biden administration. She was part of that administration. So I think the question that people were asking themselves, do we want a continuation of the Biden administration? Because she was asked this question during debates and by journalists in this country. Is there something that you disagree with or you would do differently than President Joe Biden? And the answer she gave was no. So what does that mean? That means that if she had secured the White House, she would continue doing what President Biden was doing.
Okay.
And people disapprove of that, and they have shown it in the polls.
Okay, so from here onwards, at the domestic front, what do you think is going to be the priority? We've seen during the election campaign from President Donald Trump talking about immigration, and he's said a number of times that he's going to undertake the biggest or the largest deportation drives in the history of the United States of America. America, he used to say, is going to be liberated on 5th of November. And how do you think he is going to take this particular issue from here onwards as the 47th president of the US?
I mean, you'll be surprised when I say this. It's not just Trump who wanted immigration reforms. It's Kamala Harris actually pushed that as well. And this is something that I find mind-boggling about her. Back in the days, she disagreed with Donald Trump's border wall policy.
Yeah.
But here we are today. Harris agrees. She was ready to sign a bipartisan bill on immigration. That's A. B, there are many other differences between the two administrations or two blocs, but in reality, there are none. For example, uh, Democrats were very critical of the trade tariffs introduced by Donald Trump against countries like China. But look at what Joe Biden did when he came into power. He extended those tariffs. So I think the biggest problem here is Democrats, especially the Biden administration and people like Kamala Harris, when they say one thing, but their actions, they tell an entire different story. So coming back to your question, I think you were right on point. I do agree with that. That here in the United States, people have basically become frustrated with how the administration was working, and there are many factors involved here. It's of course there's a Trump factor, but then there is this Muslim vote factor, the Latino vote factor, the minority vote factor, the independents. And we can talk about the Muslim vote.
The very important point that you just mentioned now, the Muslim votes, when we talk about one of those 7 swing states, Michigan, we've seen there is the largest Arab and Muslim population over there, and they also expressed their open support to former President Donald Trump during his election campaign. Of course, President Trump has led that particular swing state as well. Is it because of that support by the Muslim voters to former President Donald Trump that he was able to take this particular swing state? And from here onwards, how do you think the situation in Gaza that has developed since 7th of October back in 2023 is going to be handled or addressed by the president when he takes over the chair at the White House?
I'll give you a very short answer to the last part of your question. I don't think there will be a significant change in America's Gaza policy or Israel policy. Both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, they're very much the same. In fact, both Republicans and Democrats, they're very much the same when it comes to
Israel.
Correct.
Relentless support, unequivocal support towards Israel. But what about that stance of former President Donald Trump when he says that he's against the war and the kind of aid in terms of military equipment as well as the other ways around that has been released since 7th of October 2023 by the Biden administration? Do you think President Trump is going to actually look into that seriously?
I think he's not just going to look into that, he's going to extend that even further, because remember, during the past 6 months or so, Donald Trump has said on multiple occasions that it's President Biden who is stopping Netanyahu from doing what Israel is supposed to do. I mean, but of course, the Israelis would say that this is exactly what they're doing, and this is how they have been able to convince the Biden administration to give them billions of dollars in aid. But if you look at Donald Trump wants to expand U.S.'s support to Israel even further. And to what extent it is going to happen when he becomes the next president of the country, well, that remains to be seen. But
so
again,
if that's the case, sorry for the interruption over here, if that's the case, as per your understanding, so do you think that support that was expressed by Muslims or Arabs here in the U.S. for former President Donald Trump was the right calculation?
I'll tell you what, I went to Dearborn, Michigan. It's considered the Arab capital of the United States. It has the highest concentration of Muslims living in the United States. And I spoke to many people over there. And I'll tell you what, I did not find a single person who told me at the time that they're going to vote for Kamala Harris. What people told me were two things. A, we are going to vote for Donald Trump, not because we have suddenly embraced Republican values. No, because we want to punish the Democrats. That's A. B, we're going for a third-party candidate, Dr. Jill Stein. And the results from Dearborn are out. Donald Trump has won Dearborn. Kamala Harris has suffered a huge defeat in Dearborn, a Muslim majority city of the United States. And I think this is something that we are seeing happen, not just in Dearborn, not just in Michigan, but in many other swing states. Because the thing here is, most of the Muslim population here in the United States, they're concentrated in swing states. And this is why I have been saying this. Muslims in the country are maker or breaker of the elections. I'll take you back to 2020. Joe Biden won Georgia by 13,000 to 15,000 votes, right? What was the total number of Muslim voters in Georgia at the time in 2020? It was 61,000. Let's go to Pennsylvania. He won Pennsylvania with about 81,000 votes. What was the total number of Muslim voters in Pennsylvania in 2020? 125,000. Michigan, he won Michigan in 2020 with 150,000 votes. What was the total number of Muslim voters in Michigan at the time? 225,000. And according to surveys, in 2020, 70% of the Muslim population in the United States, they voted for Joe Biden, right? Of course, it makes sense for them to vote for Joe Biden because that election happened right off the back of the controversial Abraham Accords, right off the back of Donald Trump's controversial COVID policies, his Muslim ban. But now things have shifted. Now, and I think Democrats here are sending the Muslim community here is sending a very strong message to the Democrats. And I think the Republicans should also hear this message because something could happen, something similar could happen to them later on. The Muslims are sending a message that do not take us for granted. We do not have loyalties to any bloc. We care about our community. And if you take us for granted, we have the power in this country to punish you. And I think this is exactly what the Muslim community here has done.
A point very well made. So talking specifically about the Ukraine crisis, we have seen a number of times there has been a strong criticism, the use of very strong statements and words by former President Donald Trump regarding as to the budget that the European countries owe towards NATO. So do you think there is going to be an immediate resolution of the crisis in Ukraine, given the fact we have seen that particular message by the Kremlin spokesperson, also Dmitry Peskov, saying that we are going to make our policies based on the concrete words and concrete actions by President Donald Trump. And he's also at the same time said that he has used very strong statements during his election campaign. But of course, as he goes into the Oval Office, the tone might change a little bit. So at the same time, he's also said that the US is in position to resolve the Ukraine crisis, but it is the US itself which had been inflaming it.
I think the latter is true. The U.S. has inflamed the crisis, and
so how is it going to be different this time around?
That's not to say that Russia is not to be blamed. Russia is invading Ukraine right now. It shouldn't have done it. It has no right to invade any other country.
What about the expansion of NATO?
The expansion of NATO had played a huge role.
A threat to Russia, isn't
it?
Yeah,
yeah. And I think this is something that the Biden administration has realized. There's no, at this point in time, I don't see any likelihood of Ukraine becoming part of NATO because whenever this question is raised on platforms, you can see how officials here in the United States try to dodge it. Oh, you know, where there is time, we will see what happens in the future. The reality is, it's never going to happen.
Mr. Jafar Hussain, senior presenter and anchor person at TRT World, thank you very much for exclusively taking time out for our views on news at PTV World. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Well, you were just Jawad Tehami in conversation about the US politics. Now we're coming towards the studios. I'd like to include Dr. Bakir Malik in the conversation. So, all eyes towards the new president-elect Donald Trump. If we talk about the domestic factors, they were the main highlights of his campaign, focused on, of course, abortion, women's rights, immigration and economy. How would you comment on all these factors that contributed to his win in this election race?
Thank you, Rafe. I think the most important thing is that the domestic factor for the domestic challenge for the Trump, because if we see that Trump has actually identified 4 different sectors in domestic policies. First one is basically the health reforms. As when he took first president took a White House back in 2016, the first thing that he was done is actually affordable health card, and after that this Democrat restored this one. So the problem is that according to this Trump policies, health reform is basically need to more you can say as a more privatized or that should be that is a overburden for the American economy that need to be eliminated, not to include in the. So his policy is actually not a welfare like a Democrat. So one thing is that Now we see that how Trump is basically facing the issue like reproductive organs, or you can say that this abortion policies and like this, because during a campaign, Kamala Harris is basically openly like this, what is the Democrat policy to deal the abortion issue or other health issue. So this is a major challenge, how Trump, a Republican, is basically deal this issue, because in a society, society is basically divided on the abortion issue. Majority, not only a liberal, but also the some conservative is basically supporting this kind of thing. So for the Trump, the health is the most important and most challengeable policy, how it is basically dealing like this during this abortion policy and all the other issue. The second is that basically judiciary reforms. And what I believe that Trump is basically, you can say, appoint a more conservative judges.
And now he has the majority to
Majority, exactly. And
take up
this
this
is
reform.
because the first thing that, before this election campaign, what he was facing. So the first priority, how is basically induct these conservative judges are like this. So on the name of judicial reforms, maybe he will take some bold steps that may be challenge to the judicial system of the American. And third is the most important, is the immigration policy. He is a very strict about the immigrants. Why he has used the American first is that we need to restrict these immigrants because they are basically a burden on our economy. Why we are actually feeding. So you have seen that during his first term, what he was doing, the wall with this Mexico and other country, and even he was actually suspended this green card for this Indian or other citizen like this. So his immigrants policy is a more strict about that. That basically challenge the American society, that these policy is not actually a reflection of the American norms and the culture. Now we see that how Trump is basically utilize, or you can say reforms these immigrants policy. You have seen that Elon Musk is basically supporting the Trump due to this immigration policies. And according to this, Elon Musk even repeatedly saying that these immigrants is actually creating a problem for our economy. So these are the three main challenges that is actually Trump will face during this domestic world. So if we see his first term, we have seen that he was actually, his personality is unpredictable.
True.
So once he will take some decision, then he firmly stand about that. What is media is basically projecting, what the society is saying, what the people is basically analyzing the things.
Can all be subject to
Yes,
error.
exactly. He absolutely ignore each and everything.
Right.
And-
Right, Dr. Bakir. I'd also like to include Aisha Tanzim in the conversation as well and hear her views. As we know, Donald Trump, when he talked about the Ukraine war, he also vowed that he could finish it within 24 hours. You being an expert on South and Central Asia division, how do you comment on the situation and the prospects regarding the Ukraine war? And what policy would Donald Trump have in mind to stop the war within 24 hours?
Well, nobody knows. He has not said how he will stop the war in 24 hours. However, he has said that he will stop the war. So multiple things can happen. As we know, the Europeans have been cautious. They've all congratulated President-elect Donald Trump, but they've also said that Europe is now looking towards itself and strengthening itself. In the last term, we knew President-elect Donald Trump to be a little critical of NATO. However, his criticism also helped NATO in a way that a lot of countries then stepped up their support. So how can the Ukraine war end? It can end in multiple ways. There are some plans on the table. One of them includes allowing Russia to keep the areas that it has won already on the battlefield, and for the war to end immediately and for US to lift sanctions. Whether that will happen, we don't know. Another plan could be he could see, one thing about President Trump that his supporters say is, because he is so unpredictable, because he makes statements that nobody expects, that gives him an edge on the negotiation table, because nobody really knows what is in his mind. His critics say that that can create instability, but his supporters say that that gives him an edge in negotiation. We have seen some positive statements coming out of not the Russian government officially, but people linked to the Russian government, where they're saying that this left liberal alliance, they include Clinton and Obama and the Biden in that, and saying this left leaning alliance that was making America this expansionist power has ended, and Trump has expressed more isolationist policies. He has said that economically he'll be more protectionist, and that militarily he will end the wars and more isolationist. U.S. doesn't want to go into more wars. How that unfolds actually on the battlefield, we will probably find out in the coming weeks as President-elect starts assigning people for these various positions and we see them making some statements. Right now, the only thing we have to go by is his campaign rhetoric, and we don't know beyond him saying, I will end the wars, how he will go about doing that.
Right, and also, Ms. Aisha, Donald Trump, he pledged, of course, to increase the tariffs on imports. And we've also know earlier in his previous term, there was a confrontation with China with regards to global trade and technological advancements, such as the 5G war between America and China. How do you think this term is going to be any different, or do you think it's going to have the same confrontation with China with regards to the economic domains?
So again, the only thing we have to go by is the campaign rhetoric and all that he has said during his campaign, because obviously he's just become the president-elect. He said that he would levy heavy tariffs on China, one number's up to 60%, whereas he talked about tariffs on other countries somewhere between 10 to 20%. How much of that actually unfolds? You have to realize that sometimes it's internal U.S. forces that also come into play. So, for example, there are a lot of U.S. companies that do business with China, and not just importing finished goods with China, but importing, semi-finished goods, raw materials. There are a lot of companies that go and manufacture in China and then import those things back to U.S. So how those tariffs impact U.S. businesses, not just Chinese businesses, is going to be a good question and a big question. We did see a tariff war with China during his last administration. So if that is something, we could see more of the same, but how much of that we don't know yet. Whether it's a trade war because the U.S. Levies 10% tariffs on China or 20% tariffs on China would be completely different than if it's a trade war if the U.S. levies 60% tariffs on China. So the range is so huge and the options are so vast on the table that it is too early to tell. We do know from his past administration that tensions with China were high. And there is a significant concern among, the Republican Party and the right that the U.S. trade balance with China was not in U.S.'s favor. However, like I said, there are U.S. businesses that will have a say in this whole equation, and their say will matter.
Right, Ms. Aisha, that's some very important points that you raised. Coming towards Dr. Bakir Malik, of course, we're talking about prospects. We, of course, talked about the prospects for the Ukraine war. How do you comment on the Middle East situation? Do you think it's going to have any sort of reduction in the tensions, the escalation that we're seeing? And, of course, how do you comment on the recent Israel's escalation with Iran as well?
I think you have seen that there are three major players with America: US, Russia, China, and then Israel. And all these three countries are very comfortable with the Trump. So if we're talking about this, how its policy is basically work, you have seen during his electoral campaign, he was saying that I will work to cease fire, but on which terms and condition he is actually not clear.
Yes.
And even during his electoral campaign, Israeli lobby was actually supporting to the Trump campaign. But because Israel is more comfortable with the Trump, so maybe he will do something to stop the war. Compared to the Iran, with the Iran, he is always less engaged with Iran. Even during his first presidential election, you have seen that when there was a agreement documents on his table, what he was saying that on one side you have imposed a sanction and other side you have signed an agreement. So do one thing. sanction or agreement. So he suspended the nuclear deal agreement with Iran and imposed the sanction. So he is basically less focused to the Iran. Reason is that his priority is basically Israel. So at that time maybe he will use his influence to stop the war, or at least to cease fight between Israel and Hamas. So because you have seen in a first, that is Israel, basically he was working, Trump is to give a recognition to the Israel, to the different Arab countries, what we call Abraham Accord. According to this, 4 Arab countries recognize or build a diplomatic relation with Israel. So I think he will continue the same policy. On one side he will support the Israel, okay, this Abraham Accord will be extended to build a diplomatic relation with the other Arab country. On the other side, he will also engage the Middle East, these Muslim Palestinian, that okay, now it's a time to have a ceasefire. So we will work together for the humanity or for the humanitarian basis. So I think on this ground, he will work to ceasefire or to come with some agreement between Israel and like this. But apparently he is a fully supporter of the Israel.
So the foreign
don't
policy.
not expect about the regarding the foreign policy, because foreign policy is always work on the national interest, not on a humanitarian grounds. So this is one of the reason, and the national interest and strategic interest of United States are basically related to the Israel. So maybe he will continue the policy, but maybe there is a less intensity, the war situation will be reduced between Israel and Hamas. So and secondly, the China like this. China is a more comfortable with the Trump, because for a China it is to dealing a Trump is a very easy as compared to the Democrats.
Right.
So if you're talking
and why would
about
you say
it,
that?
yeah, exactly, because if you're talking that there is a trade war or technological war, its technological war is not that because it is impacting the American economy, because its approach of its policy of the protectionist. As he is using the American first, it means he is basically he is more care about the American own industries or local industries. So that's why he used increase a tariff about this import or like this. So this is the reason the trade war between America and China is not that is impacting, but actually the policy of the protectionist. So even when he was a president, he was starting a campaign against to ban the TikTok, ban the AI, like this. There is a trade war between America and US on the basis of AI and 5G. So for the China, you have seen even after that, during the Trump, we have seen a number of agreement between Trump and Chinese president. So it means China is a more comfortable.
It makes a competitive market.
Exactly.
Ms. Aisha Tanzim, there's another factor that I'd like to discuss with you, which relates to a global phenomena, of course, climate change. Donald Trump, he has hinted towards expanding, of course, the production of oil and gas, which means expanding the carbon footprint in the world as well. How do you think his policies are going to go hand in hand with this issue of climate change that is being faced by the global community at large?
Well, we know that President-elect Trump has in the past been critical of the science on climate change, and he has hinted that he does not believe that the climate change is a human phenomena, and that climate in the world has changed according to him, from hot to cold and cold to hot. So he doesn't think that the impact of human action on climate change is as large as a lot of scientists say it is. So therefore, he has promoted a policy of more drilling. Baby drill has been one of his mantra. And he has also said that he's going to reduce restrictions on construction and reduce environmental laws and make it easier for businesses to grow. However, his supporters say that that means that all kinds of industry, including clean energy industry, will grow, that he will boost his agenda has been more about economic restarting the engine of economy and allowing Americans who are feeling inflation, and they voted on inflation, to make them feel more comfortable. He feels comfortable in saying that economy is higher priority, and that that's how he is going to act, and that's how his administration is planning to act. Would it have an impact on the global climate? And how much that impact would be, I would leave that to the scientists. I am not one, and therefore I can't really say much to it. But we do see that in the past administration, America did withdraw from the Paris Climate Accords, and then President Biden came back and joined it again. So you could see some of those actions. But then you could also see Europeans stepping up and taking up some of that burden, and you could see China and countries like India and China and others who have equal concerns about climate to also, take up some of those causes. So we will see how this figures out in the next administration.
Right, and Ms. Aisha, as what was heard with regards to the electoral campaigns, a mantra that was repeated again and again, a slogan that we saw everywhere, even on the caps that President-elect Donald Trump was wearing, "Make America Great Again." Before the polls yesterday, every analyst was talking about how the American society is polarized at the moment with regards to the poll surveys that we were seeing. How do you think Make America Great Again and diffusing that polarization, do you think Donald Trump would be successful in that?
Well, you need to have somebody from Donald Trump's campaign to speak to that, whether he'll be successful in making America great again and what is his definition of great. As you said, the society is polarized. If you talk to the
I mean a
left,
more
they will say
inclusive
that
environment.
no, so what I'm saying is, if you talk to the left or the Democrats, especially the Democrats that are more left of center, they will say that his definition of great is taking America back, and they talked about, abortion rights and women's right over their own bodies and the LGBTQ community and various kinds of human rights that they think make America a better society. If you talk to people on the right, especially people who voted for Trump, they say making America great again is kind of like the Reagan years when, or even after that, when America was considered to be the superpower in the world. And in their opinion, people respected America more. And in their opinion, the economy was better and they were doing better financially. And they think making America great again is all about financial power and it's all about military power. So it's two different worldviews. As you said, the society is polarized. Whether the two will come together, um, eh, eh, right now there are not many indications that the two will come together. But is it impossible? No, because if President-elect all and if the Republicans also win control of the House, they're leading, but the House is still, we don't know yet who'll control the House. We know that they control the Senate. We know that they control the White House. In the legislation that they do, if they reach out and if they pull the other side closer, maybe it will become more inclusive. But if they push their agenda and if they steamroll it, we will see more division. We have seen this kind of swing in the American society. So we saw from President Bush, it went to President Obama, and from President Obama, some people said that, President Trump's win was like a pendulum swinging back. And then we now saw that the economy has become the primary issue. So the pendulum first swung to President Biden. President Biden received the highest number of votes in American history. And a lot of people and a lot of analysts said at the time that that was an anti-Trump vote. But now the pendulum has swung to his side again. So uh, the society goes back and forth. And even as it's shifting to the right and shifting to the left, we are also seeing that it's not staying on one side for long. It is literally shifting back and forth every 4 years or every 8 years, which means that there are a lot of people in the middle who can go either way, which means that there's a lot of space for both sides to work with the independents and with each other.
Of course, that's a very articulate Ms. Aisha Tanzim, head of Voice of America's South and Central Asia Division. Thank you for your time and being part of the conversation. I'd also like to thank Dr. Bakir Malik, foreign affairs expert who had joined us in the studios. Thank you for your time and being part of the conversation as well. That wraps up Views on News for today, as we were discussing the win of Donald Trump. the president-elect, the 47th president, as he'll be sworn in. And of course, we know the Republicans now, they are in a very strong position, as Donald Trump also said in his speech earlier, that the American people have given him a very strong mandate. Of course, we'll see this, as Ms. Aisha Tanzim also mentioned, Make America Great Again. It's something that's very subjective and everyone has its own definition of it. But we truly hope to see that the new president-elect implementing his policies and doing great for America and the world at large. That's all we have for Views on News for today. See you same time next week. Till then, take care.